Right then, so let's see what we need to get going on this first square. So this is for January. So the colour that we've chosen is Duck Egg. It's this lovely icy blue, which is reflective of the freezing cold temperatures that we've been experiencing, nice and chilly. And then the pattern that we're going to be creating, the texture, is this sort of diagonal rib texture, and this is reflective of the icy driving rain that we've been experiencing and that is characteristic of January. So you'll need your yarn. If you are using a thicker or a thinner yarn, so this is chunky, so we're going to be using our 6mm hook. If you're using a double knit, then use about a 3.5, 4. Aran, you want about a 5, 5.5. So adapt your hook size to your yarn weight. We will also need a yarn needle to be sewing in our ends, because we're going to have 48 squares. So if you leave all of your ends till the end, that's going to be a pretty miserable job. So we are going to do this as we go along. So we need a yarn needle. You will need a tape measure just so that we can check that it's square. There is, if you notice, there is a handy little ruler down the edge of your page there, of your pattern. So you can use that, or we can use one. And we'll need some little snips. Okay, so we've once you've gathered all those things, let's get going. Now, as with everything, if you're doing it in a different yarn, you might want to have bigger squares, or you might need more stitches. So this is a really, really simple adaptation for this one. We're going to be working this square in diagonal rows. And when I have got 19 stitches, I think I'm going to say 33 stitches, not 19. When I've got 33 stitches across this row, I'm going to stop and start decreasing. You can do exactly the same if you're using your chunky. If you want to make bigger squares, or you're doing something in a different yarn weight, then all you would do is when your square gets to the hypotenuse, is it, of the triangle, a bit of A-level math coming back through there. So when this gets to the size that you want it to be, you would then start your decrease to coming up this way. Okay. Now, if you are a very, very new crocheter, if you're like a beginner plus, and that you're finding these diagonal half trebles a bit of a tricky challenge, then at the end of the video I will show you how you could do it in rows, and we can just do a slightly simplified version. You'll still get the texture, it's just that your stripes will go this way instead of diagonal. All right, so don't panic if you're really struggling with it, because there is a little bit of counting involved. Oh, and we also need 2 stitch markers. How did I forget that? 2 stitch markers. So there are a few notes just to have a read to before we get started. Now, if you've not seen one of my patterns before, if you've never done one of our patterns, there's usually a bit of blurb here at the top, then your instructions of what you need, and then there's some things that it will usually say something like important notes. Read them. Many people do not. So let's just have a quick look through these. So it says the pattern is worked from corner to corner. So until you reach the midpoint, every row will increase by 3 stitches. So if we're doing a count, we should increase by 3 every row. All stitches are worked into the back loop only, and that's in capitals, so I must mean it. So I will show you what that means when we get going. So it says the back loop of the final stitch can be a little tricky to see, so it might help to put a stitch marker in the top of the first half treble of each row, so that you can spot it easily when you come back to it at the end of the next row. I know stitch markers can be a bit of a pain in the bum, but they are our friend. And then check your shape regularly, because it is easy to go off course if you miss a stitch or add an extra one at either end. Oh, look, typo there, either end. It's very northern of the row. So regularly lay your work flat and make sure that you're producing a right angled triangle. We want to be having a roughly right angled shape here. Okay, it's made of wool, so it's never going to be like super straight, but we can have it reasonably straight. Okay, so I write my patterns using full words. There's no abbreviations, so they're like a sort of a gateway pattern to helping you understand commercial ones. So I'm going to pop that over there, and I will do my crochet in this bit. Okay, so step 1 says chain 3. So we always start with a slip knot. So I'm going to, and leave yourself about a 15cm tail. On most people, finger to thumb is about 15cm. So we want to leave at least this much for your tail, because we're going to sew these ends in, and we need plenty of ends left to sew in. So we start with a slip knot, which is where we wrap it around and pull it through and pull up our loop there. Lovely. And we've got our 6mm hook and we pop it on, and then we lace ourselves up. Lovely. And so it then says chain 3, so we're just going to 1, 2 and 3. So when we're counting our chains, the one on the hook doesn't count as anything, so I've got 1, 2, 3. Then says work 3 half treble crochets into the first chain you made. So we're going into this one, not up here. So on a half treble crochet is where we wrap around, push it through that first chain that you made right down there, right next to the knot, wrap your yarn over and pull it back through your work to give you 3 loops on your hook, up your hook and wiggly wiggle, and then wrap. Now this middle one, if your hook's going to get stuck anywhere, it's going to get stuck underneath this middle one because it's not technically a loop all the way around, it's just a wrap. So when you're pulling it through, what you've got to do is, so pull down lightly with this one, push up lightly with your right hand, and it should just glide through. So that's 1. And we want 3 of those into the first chain we made. So we're going back into that same hole down there. Yep, can we see there? I'll zoom in a bit there. Back into there. Wrap, through, back, wrap, and through all 3. And then same again for the third one. Wrap, through, back, wrap, and through all 3. So this is I've got my 3 here, and the turning chain throughout this pattern does not count as your first stitch. So technically we've got 3 stitches plus our chain. Okay, now all my patterns always say turn and then chain. That is the standard order that you would state them in. I always chain before I turn. I just find it a little bit easier. So I'm going to do my 2 chain from my next row, 1, 2, and then I turn, and I'm going to turn it. So if I could see the front of the stitches there, I'm going to turn it that way over, and I can now see these nice holes in the top. So these 3 here are my 3 stitches, and I'm ignoring this turning chain down here. So it says work 3 half treble crochets into the back loop only of the stitch at the base of the turning chain. What a sentence. So here are, if we look along the top of your work, this one here, can we zoom in a bit? Zoom in, move closer. This one here, there, that is your front loop. The loop at the back, not too surprisingly, that one's your back loop. So all of our stitches are going to go into there, and these front loops that remain unworked will produce our ridged effect. So we go wrap around in the middle of the V on the top and out the back. So I'm only going under 1 strand of that one. Pull my loop up for my half treble, wrap and through 3. So we're going to do, every row starts with 3 into the first one. So that's 1, 2 and 3, like that. Okay, the next instruction says work a half treble crochet into the back loop only of the next stitch. So there's my next stitch. I would normally go in there, but instead I'm going in the back loop only. So in there, half treble. And then the third one, the final stitch, is here. So I'm going to go into this back loop only, and I'm going to do 2 into that last one. So 2 half trebles into the back loop only. So we go through there, 1 and 2. Now you do get some slight holes forming at each edge, but don't worry, they will disappear once we do our little bordery bit, and they'll get sucked in. All right, so that is row 2 done. Hooray, we're motoring. So we're then going to start row 3, which says turn and then chain 3. So I do it the other way. So chain 2, sorry, turn 2, turn. So every row is going to start with 3 half trebles in this back loop of the first stitch, and then half treble, half treble, half treble, half treble, until you get to the last stitch where we put 2 half trebles into the back loop of that one. Okay, so what we're going to start to do now though is, once we do this first stitch in here, I'm going to put a stitch marker into the top of it, because then that will tell me where my last stitch is at the end of the next row. That makes sense? I think so. Right, so we got working loop, first chain, second chain, there's my back loop there. So I go in there, and that's my first half treble. So that's going to be my last one at the end of the next row. So I'm going to put a slip stitch underneath both of those there. Can you see there where I've gone into? I've gone into that underneath there, and I'm going to, a lock-in stitch marker is good. If you've not got stitch markers, paper clip, safety pin, Kirby grip, anything you fancy, bit of string. So I've got one into there, so I want to do 2 more half trebles into that same back loop only. So 1, 2, 3. And then I do 1. So on this row, because I forgot to put it in at the other end, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then our last stitch. So we're going to do 4 half trebles. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so this is what I mean now about the back loop sometimes hiding a little bit. If we got to the end there, it's quite easy for us to go, no, that doesn't look like a real stitch, I'll ignore that and carry on. But this is our back loop down here, so when we get to the end of the next row, we'll have a stitch marker in it to show us. But here we're going to just go into, and we're going to pick up, so I've got my front loop here. Zoom in again, where are we? Whoa, not great lighting. There. Yep, so we're going into that back loop there, and we're going to finish with 2 half trebles in the same back loop only. So let's do a quick count. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stitches. Oh, lovely. Right, so we then do our chain 2, turn. So if my end was over here this time with the other end, I'm going to flip it that way. And then I've got working loop, 1 chain, 2 chain, first stitch, first back loop. So I do my first half treble in there, and then put my second stitch marker in. Oh, hello. Oh, it's a tight one, this. There we go. Oh, there we go. Right, so that's 1 half treble into my first stitch, so I've got to do 2 more into there. So that's 2 and 3. And then it's 1 half treble into each back loop all the way down to that stitch marker. 1. You don't have to count them. You can do if you want, but it's not vital if you've got your stitch markers in. So we're going half trebles, and you can see you're starting to get these ridges forming, and then there'll be a dip after it, which gets you your lovely texture. There. And there. And now I'm at the stitch where my stitch marker is, but that's through both loops. So I will remove it, and then in just the back loop only, I do my final 2 half trebles. 1 and 2. Lovely. Okay. So the instructions from row 4 onwards are repeat the previous row until you've got 33 stitches down here. So we're going to carry on until we've got 33. So if we had, did we have 9 on the last one? So let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So these should all be working in multiples of 3. So 2 chain, turn, half treble in the back loop only of that stitch at the base of the turning chain, and pop your stitch marker in the top. So I'm going underneath, so I'll look for the not the hook one that's coming out of on my hook, the one that one is coming out of, and I go under there. Lovely. So that was 1. I got my wool stuck on my feet. 1, 2, 3, all into that same hole there, and then 1 into each one across. 1. And this square is going to form your basic measurements that all of the squares will be compared to. So it's important that we try and get these 4. Well, I'm making 4 of each design. If you don't want to do 4 of each design, then that is fine. I've roughly, I've sort of calculated the pattern so that each square should take no more than 25 grams of wool. So you can get 4 squares out of your 1 ball of 100 grams of yarn. So I'm back up to my stitch marker here. So I take my stitch marker out, find the back loop, have a fertile around, there it is. And then we do 2 half trebles into the back loop only of that one there. Lovely. Chain 2, turn, and half treble in that back loop only there, and pop my stitch marker back in the top of that stitch. Lovely. So that was 1. So I need me 2 more into that same space. 2, 3. and then we do 1 into each one all the way down. I have made an entire baby blanket and an entire adult blanket using just this stitch, and it gives such a lovely texture. It's really, really nice. You just get a really bouncy, lovely fabric that it creates, and it's kind of mindless. You don't really need to pay attention, especially if you're doing your if you're using your stitch markers right. You don't really need to count or pay that much attention until you reach the edges, really, which is the dream when it comes to a crochet stitch, as far as I'm concerned. You can focus on whatever you got on the telly. Right, let's take that out. Ooh. There. So I then do my 2 in my last one. 1 and 2, and then 2 chains and turn. Now, as you can see, if we do that thing where I said in the instructions, just check that you're making a roughly a right angled shape. Oh, lovely. Not got a protractor handy, but if we did, I don't think that would be too far out. Right, so onwards. So we do 3 into that first one, but we're going to put our stitch marker in the top of the first one. Lovely. And then, so 2 more into that one. 1 and 2. And then all the way down there. We'll do a quick count at the end of this row, because we all know maths isn't my strong point. So I'm up to my last stitch, remove my stitch marker, and then 2 half trebles into this back loop only of the final stitch, and then do our 2 chain, and we'll turn. Let's do a quick count. So when we're counting, you can take your hook out. So I've got my 1 over here, that doesn't count as anything. I've got my 2 chains there, I'm ignoring those. So I'm going to go down and count along the top, all the V's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So that tells me that we've done 7 rows. And if we're getting up to 33, which is 11, we should have another 4 rows to go if my 3 times table is up to scratch. So let's do my first half treble in there, stitch marker back in. Lovely. 2 more. 1, 2, and then all the way along to the end. So what I'll do, I'll not make you watch me do all of those next 4 rows, because they're going to start taking a bit longer and a bit longer. So I will see you back when we've got 33 stitches and we're ready to start decreasing. See you in a bit. Okay, so by my careful reckoning, I have now got 33 stitches, so we'll just do a quick check. So we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33. Lovely. So I've still got my stitch marker from this end, and the stitch markers are now going to become even more important. So this next bit, so we're going to decrease. Let me chairs on my wool. So we're going to start decreasing, but they're not quite the same as just a straightforward half treble decrease, because if we did just a half treble decrease, we'd get like a bit of a bit sticking up here, and we want it to be a nice straight edge. So here's what we're going to do. So it says, just say read below carefully in capitals, so I really mean it. So chain 2 does not count as the next stitch, and then we've turned. So what it says is we're going to decrease 3 stitches together in the following way. So wrap your yarn around your hook and insert under the back loop only of the stitch at the base of the turning chain. So that's working loop 1, 2 into that first stitch there, and pull up a loop. Okay. We then want to insert the hook in the back loop of the next stitch and pull up a loop. So that's that one. So in there, pull up a loop. So I've now got 4 on my hook. And the same again into the third one. In there, catch yarn, pull up a loop. So I've now got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops on my hook. It then says wrap around your hook and pull through all 5 loops, and give it a bit of a tug just to kind of pull it into a nice shape. And we then put our stitch marker back in the top loop on the top of those decreases. There. We're then going to carry on half treble in all the way down to 2 stitches before the end. So the stitch, the penultimate, no, the stitch before the stitch marker. I don't know. English and maths. English should really be my speciality, shouldn't it? I've not been a professional Englisher for some years now. For those of you that don't, I used to be an A-level English lecturer, which is why you'd think I'd be better at using the language, but practice makes perfect. Right, so we're half trebling all the way down there. Just had a hot Vimto on, I think it might have been laced. Right, all the way down here, keep going, half trebles, back loop only. You should be getting this really, really nice like texture appearing now. If your tension is a little bit too tight and you're not really getting a very sort of lacy, flexible fabric, you could always try going up a hook size. So try it on a 6.5mm. I am quite a tight crocheter, so I have to adapt my tension a little bit so that I get a nice loosey-goosey fabric. Otherwise, everything I make is like Kevlar. Right, so we're coming down here. So we want to stop at the stitch before the stitch marker, because we're decreasing 3 at each start and 2 at each end. Right, so here, so we're going to take this out there, and it says, and it spells this out for you nice and clearly. So decrease the final two stitches together in the following way. So wrap the yarn around your hook and insert it in the back loop of the penultimate stitch, so that's there, and pull up a loop, and then insert the hook in the back loop of the final stitch in there, pull up a loop. We should have 4 loops on our hook. We wrap around and we pull through all 4 and we give it a little tug. If we then do our 2 chain and turn, this is going to be our corner point here and there, and you can see we've started to bring in these edges already. Okay, so we'll just go through another decrease just so that we can remind ourselves what it looks like. So we're going to decrease together over these first 3 stitches. So the first one is like a half treble, so we wrap around in the back loop of the first stitch and pull up a loop. No wrapping for these other 2, so we're technically like treating these like a decrease, a double crochet decrease. So round and through 1 in the second stitch there, oh lovely, and through. So we've got our 5 loops coming out of 3 separate stitches. So that means that when we pull through all these 5, that is a decrease, because we've got 3 loops at the bottom but only 1 loop at the top. And pop our stitch marker back in there. Lovely. So then again we half treble all the way down. So I'll just show you one more decrease at the other end, and then we will do a bit of video magic and skip the process of me finishing this off, and then we'll come back to show you how you do your border. So we're going down along here, half treble, back loop only, half treble, back loop only. I love a half treble. It was the first stitch that I learnt. Kate Crook, who might be watching this video, taught me how to do a half treble. And I went home and very slowly made a blanket out of just half trebles. They weren't through the back loop only though. They were just normal half trebles. So thank you, Kate. You're responsible for all of this. Right, so we're coming down here. Now these stitch markers are really, really useful at this stage, because it's very easy to not spot the end of the row and just kind of keep on this bit and just sort of keep going and end up down here and go, that doesn't look very much like a square. So we are coming up to, I can feel my stitch marker, it's hiding itself a little bit there. There it is. So that's my stitch, my penultimate stitch, so I want to go up to, I've got 3 more, 1, 2, 3. Right, so if we remember what we do, we wrap yarn around hook, insert in the back loop of the penultimate stitch, pull up a loop, and then just stick your hook in, no wrapping, through the final loop, pull it through to the front, 4 loops on your hook, wrap your yarn around and pull through all 4, and just tighten that in a little bit, and you can see you're getting a nice square shape here. And then we do our decrease. I'll just do 1, so we got wrap around, in the first one, pull up a loop, in the second one, pull up a loop, in the third one, pull up a loop, wrap through all three and put that stitch marker back in. I'm gonna have no sympathy for any of you that do not use your stitch markers. Right, I will finish this square off and then I will see you and I'll show you how we do our little slip stitch border. So, see you in a bit. Right then, so I'm at the point now where I've just got 3 stitches left and I'm not going to do a decrease 3 together. I'm going to do 1, 2, chain and turn, and then I'm going to ignore that little first one there. This chain is going to count as that one, so I'm going to ignore the stitch at the base of the turning chain and we're going to go wrap around in the first one and then in the next one, which would be the last stitch with your stitch marker in. So I've got 4 loops on my hook and I wrap it and I pull it through all 4. So I should then have something that looks roughly square. Hooray! Right, so what we're going to do now with our stitch markers then, while we've still got them here, we're going to trace this line because we want to find our corner points. So if you find your most extreme corner points, it's probably somewhere in the middle of this chain, on just sort of below that line there. So I'm going to put that in there. Not absolutely vital, but it does help the next bit. And I'll put the other one, so I'm going to come in, stick it in there like that. Right, so around the edge of each square, it's almost like I've planned this, around the edge of each square we're going to do a slip stitch border. Now this just gives us, because of the squares are in different designs, they're going to have raw edges in different places, and if we do a slip stitch border around all of them, when we come to join them up, they've all got the same number of stitches along the edges and they're easier to join. So we're going to work on 20 along each edge. If you're doing bigger squares or little squares, smaller squares, make a note of how many you're putting along each edge. Same for if you are doing a different hook size, write it on the pattern, because if you do anything in between and you forget, then you come back and go, I can't remember. So write it all on here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a slip stitch border. Now we've not got 20 nice neat stitches to go into, so there's a little bit of fudging and jiggery pokery to go on. We know that we're going to start here, and by the time we get to here we want to have done 20 stitches. So it might be that you get a little bit of the way down and you go, oh no, pull it back, I'll stick a few more in. I've done quite a lot of these, so I've got my eye in a little bit, but as this is probably your first one, you might need a little bit more what should we say, fettling. So to do the border, so it says at the bottom, chain 1 and then work a slip stitch border, 20 stitches per side and 1 chain at each corner. So I'm going to chain 1. Now you can turn if you want to and work through that side, or you can work along this edge. For this pattern, because there's no right or wrong side of this square, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to carry on in the direction that I'm going. So if I think up to about there, where's my midpoint, is there, I need to get 10 slip stitches in. So if we just have a quick look, do a quick rough count of like how many loops you've got along the edge. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if I roughly go in these kind of loops that are just sort of sitting along this edge, I should get about 20 along this edge. Now we want this slip stitch border to be nice and loose because we're going to be stitching through it in 12 months time. So don't pull it very tight, just get it nice and loose and bouncy. So we've got 1, and you don't have to go a long way in, we're just doing this to just neaten up the edge of our work and give us a nice solid edge. So that's 2, better stop talking and count, hadn't I? 3, go for a 4 if it's a bit tight, oh, give it a wiggly wiggle. 5, is that right? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 5, stop talking. We'll have a 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, I was going to go back to there. I've split my wall there. Let's do a quick count. What do we have? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. and 10. So I'll just check that I'm roughly at my midpoint. Oh, will you look at that? Beautiful. So that's 10. So I'm going to carry on. I want to get up to 20. So that's 11. You can pick up, doesn't matter, you don't always have to be looking for the same loop, just kind of stick it in where you can. That's 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, one in there, 19, and then one into this corner one here, 20. Okay, we're then going to do, make sure as well that you've not pulled it too tight. It might look a little bit wibbly, don't worry, all wibble itself out. So when we get to, we've done our 20, we do one chain, and then we're going to come back down this edge. So we're going to do exactly the same again, and we want to pick up 20 until we get to that stitch there. So that's 1, 2, 3, and you can see we're going in some of these holes, so that'll fill these holes in a little bit. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Just check. Oh, pulled one out there. 9 and 10. Not so bad there. Oh, I've just pulled it out again. The stitch does not want to stay in, does it? So that's 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So I've got 17, 18, 19, 20. So I feel like I want to pull a few back and then I can spread these out a little bit more. So let's go back to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'll pull them back to there. I'm going to move that 10th one along a bit. So that was 9. So I'll skip that up there to 10. 11. 12. 13, and then I'm going to skip over this one here, but it'll be fine, just keep it nice and loosey-goosey. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and one in that hole there, 20. So I can then do my chain 1, and I will hold my ends to the back, and then we will carry on along this edge. So we're starting the same stitch that you finish your last one in after you chain 1, and then we're going to go along to that corner. So I'll see you when I'm back round here, because you don't need to watch all of this, do you? So that was 1. See you in a bit. Right, so I've done round all 4 edges. I can stretch them and it's not pulling it in, so I've not done it too tight. It's quite nice and loosey-goosey. I'm going to take my scissors and snip off my end. Now we're going to do what we call here an invisible join, because we want to finish on the corner and we don't want to know where our corners are. So that was my first turning chain there, and this is my first slip stitch. So I've snipped off, I do my 1 chain like that, that's going to be my corner space. So I've got 1 chain, and then I pull this all the way through the end. Don't pull that chain too tight, you'll need to spot that. Then we find our yarn needle and we thread it. Now, so I want to go, that's my first slip stitch there. So I find it, here it is. Can we see it in there? How's that? So that's my last stitch that I've been working into. So this is my first slip stitch here. So I'm going to take my thread that's coming out of the middle of my last chain, and I go underneath the front and back loops of that first slip stitch. and I pull it in just to sort of replicate the tension of the other stitches. I then want to put my needle back in that hole where that thread has come out of so that it completes like the loop. So I'm going to put it through there. I'm also going to put it underneath any other strands that I can at the back just to sort of bring it in a little bit. So through there and out the back. And then if I pull this down nice and slowly, you should be able to see that that then looks just like all the other stitches and we can't see where our join is. Right, so the side with the slip stitch border showing is going to be the front, so we're going to sew our ends in the along the back. Now because it's a half loop only, it's not the through a back loop only, it's not the easiest stitch to sew your ends into because you've not got like the nice solid legs at the bottom. So I'm just going to weave it through a bit, not pulling it too tight until I can find these legs, these double legs here of the bottom of my first row. So I just weave it sort of through where I want it to go. And we're going to sew our ends in 2 directions. So I'm going to pick up along here now. So that's 2 there. I've got a few there where I've got my decrease. We'll try and go through all of those there. And then through those 2 there. And then through those 2 there. And I'll pick up that little one at the end there. So I'm going to pull it all the way through here. Don't pull it too tight because you'll affect your tension. Pull it so that it matches the tension of your blanket. And then I'm going to go, so I've come all the way this way. I'm going to go over one and back through the same places that I went through before. Okay, through there, pull it through. Again, don't pull it too tight. Ooh. Pull it through so you're matching the tension of the fabric of the stitches, and then snip off that end nice and close. Because it's a blanket, like we said, it's going to be under whatever it is that we're making. If you're not doing a blanket, it's going to be under a lot of sort of pressure and tension being moved around. It's not just a static thing, so you must make sure that your ends are secure. Okay, so let's just quickly do this one down this end. So again, we've got quite a nice few little legs here that are we could go under for a nice solid end sewing in. So I'm going to go underneath all of these stitches at this end all the way through, and this is very much like you don't have to look for exactly the same stitches as I'm going through because yours might look a bit different. So I'll go over the first one and then back through all the others and out the end there, and then we snip it off. Right, so that's your first square done. Now, if you want to weigh it and just make sure that it doesn't weigh more than 25 grams. If it weighs more than 25 grams, you're not going to get 4 squares out of each ball. If it does weigh more than 25 grams, what you can do is go down a hook size, because it probably means that you've got quite a loose tension, and so your stitches are using more wool. Okay, if you're not bothered about getting 4 out of a ball, then carry on. So what we'll do is we will leave this one here. So if you're doing the blanket the same as I am, we want 4 of these. Now if you are a beginner and you're not too happy about these doing these decreases and increases, and you just want to keep it a bit more simple for now, stay tuned and we will show you another version doing it in rows without the decreases and increases. All right. If you're quite happy with this and you're all done, then I will see you for the next one. All right, see you in a bit. Okay, so if you are not enjoying or don't fancying dicing with these decreases and increases, or if you fancy doing 2 in one design and 2 in another design, mixing it up a little bit, what I'm going to show you now is how we can just do half trebles through the back loop only in rows. So I've got a little bit of yarn left here, so we'll chuck that down there. Now from this point on, most of our squares, if they're done in a row, we're going to be aiming for 20 stitches. So we do same as we did before. We get our 15 centimeter tail, make a slip stitch and pop it on our hook. Lovely. So when we're doing chains as a row, we've always got to add a little bit on extra for the end. So first of all, we'll do our 20. So 1, 2, keep these nice and loosey goosey, then your edges don't pull. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, so we don't count the one on the hook. So that's the base for our 20 stitches. Now we have to do a turning chain to count as our first stitch, so I'm going to do 2 on top of that one that will sit on top of it. So 1, 2, and then I'm going to start in the 4th chain from the hook, because this, the base chain and those 2 on top of it, are going to count as your first one. So I'm going to go in the 4th one, so wrap around, in and back and round and through 3, exactly the same as we were doing before for your half treble. So this row we're just going under the top bar of our chain, so half trebling all the way along like that. Lovely jubbly. If you prefer to go through the back hump, you can do that. I'm a top chain girl and I find it a bit easier when we're coming to do our slip stitch edges to have just gone through the top bar of the chain. It just makes it easier to see your stitches. There we go. Now on this one, our turning chain is going to count as one of our first stitches, so we're going to have to miss the first one. So stitch markers will still be quite useful, because a half treble can look a little bit different to some other stitches. It looks a bit, the stitch that sits on top of it is always skewed a little bit to one side or the other, depending on whether you are right or left-handed. And so we have to accommodate for that. Right, okay, so I'm at the end of my chain now, so we'll do a quick stitch count because we want to make sure we've got 20 including the chain. So we've got, if we start here, start from where your chain was, where you finished. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 and 20. Delightful. So a turning chain for a half treble, so you know what I'm doing, is only 2 chains high. So we do 2 chains, and then what I'm going to do is put a stitch marker in that second chain that I made. So not the one on the loop on the hook, this one down here. I'm just going to put a little stitch marker in there. Okay, and we're then going to go into the back loop only of each stitch along the way, but the chain is going to count as that first stitch. So we go working loop, first chain, second chain, first stitch, ignore all those, starting in the second stitch in the back loop only. So we've got, like we said before, if you were going in the stitch normally, we'd go in there underneath the front and back loop. We'll go in the middle and out the back. So that's 1, well, 2, and then 3. Hang on, my wool's all stuck. And we go all the way along. 4, 5, back loop onlying. Better new verb up. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and then we're going to go into this turning chain here. So if you can kind of flip it over a bit and look for the back of that first chain, then you're just keeping your ridges consistent. And we go in there, and that's our 20. Okay, so we would then carry on doing exactly the same. So we'd go with our chain 2, 1, 2, pop your slip stitch, your stitch marker in the second chain that you made. Oh, this little purple one's so tight. And then, so that one will count as your first stitch that's going to go into there. So the chain will count as that stitch when it sits on top of it. So we started the next one along. So that's all we do. We carry on then until this is a square. So I'll just do a few more. Once I start, I just get addicted. Hooked, can't stop. Haha. Right, I'll stop. So what you would do is you would carry on until this edge here measures the same as that edge. Now what you could do is you can either use a tape measure, kicking it old school, like that. So we've got about 17-ish centimetres there, and if we measure this Oh my lord, well you look at that, it's about 17 centimetres. It's like I've thought it through. So what you would do is you would carry on until it was as big as this. Now another way to do it, if you've not got a ruler or anything handy to check if something is a square, is to fold like that edge up to there. So if you were checking if this was a square, fold your two diagonal corners towards each other, and if they meet, then your sides are the same length. All right, so when you have finished this one, when it's a square, you would do exactly the same with a slip stitch border. It'll just be a bit easier on two of the sides here, because you would just do a slip stitch into each chain along there, and then you'll have some nice double legs to stitch all your ends in. Okay, right, I think that's it. If you've got any questions, then either drop them in the comments or go over to the Facebook group and you can message me over there. I hope that you enjoy this first one and that you will stick with us. And yeah, give us a shout if you need anything, and I will see you soon. Bye bye.